Hey everybody, Professor Snart checking in. It's been a little while here. We are just at the tail end then of our final workshop, the open genre workshop. So you may have noticed, depending on when you're looking at this or looking at the grades, as usual, because of the different due dates and posting times and that kind of thing, if you posted on time, then you sort of got half the grade, or I fill in that half, and then of course fill out the rest once the feedback portion of the workshop has come and gone. So again, if you're looking at this and happen to see a much lower grade than you think you should get based on the work that you've done, it's probably just that I haven't caught up with grading the rest of it. So anyway, we move then out of our final workshop and into the last unit of the class. And it's pretty straightforward. I think you've probably noticed, and I've mentioned before, that we really get much less involved as the course goes on in terms of like learning new stuff or doing activities or that kind of thing. It becomes much more focused on, the workshop environment. And now that we reach the end, it's that moment of reflection. It's kind of a corny piece of classes that you've probably been part of before. The old, what did you learn in this class kind of question. But for as cliched as it is, I think, and maybe this is why it's cliched, it's a really valuable final piece of the puzzle that we've put together here. And I suppose maybe it's just because I teach this, but it seems like this kind of class lends itself even more readily to this moment of reflection than other kinds of classes that are maybe more fact-based, like what did you learn? Well, you could list a whole bunch of dates or, historical references or that kind of stuff, which is less important than, of course, like how your brain is different. What have you learned about yourself as a learner, or in our case, about yourself as a writer? So it's much more valuable to think not in terms of like what specific information, quote unquote, did I learn, but what specific information did I learn, and now how can I apply that, or how have I applied it? And for us, again, the context is obviously your work as a creative writer, whatever genre you happen to be interested in, and that might be multiple genres. So for as cliched and sort of corny as it might feel, this final reflection that you're writing is, I think, one of the most important pieces of the class. So there's a couple of things to think about here, and I'm in the unit just so you can read this for yourself as well. But you're obviously writing from your own personal experience, so you're using the I voice, but don't let that become just this informal wandering kind of back and forth, like misshape an essay. So it's informal as far as tone goes, but really think or try to organize it effectively. And this is, less about writing a good essay or the composition part of it, and really more because thinking in terms of like, how do I organize this, is really a mode of thinking about what you learned in the class in a really systematic way, which is important. Is precisely what we want to do at this point. Obviously, we're focused on craft, like the skill of writing. And remember that I've mentioned before that writing is a skill, and this is something that we have to think about because all of these other things follow from that initial basic premise or basic assumption. The most important of which is that if writing is a skill, then it's something that we get better at the more we practice it. Like other kinds of skills or like a sport, you don't get better at basketball by always just playing games of basketball. If you've ever been part of a competitive team, you know that you practice, and this is the part everyone hates, the drills, the little pieces of a basketball game taken out of context. And that, again, is something that thinking about writing as a skill makes those little exercises make sense, not in and of themselves, but as preparation for that larger context of writing, as a whole. So it's a very simplistic kind of thing, writing as a skill, but a lot of things follow from that. And of course, that's sort of shaping your final reflection here, because ultimately you're thinking about how did you, or what did you learn in the class, or how did you change as a writer, or how do you see yourself changing relative to craft as someone who practices now the skill of writing. So how did you get better? And the other piece of this that I think is really important, that's maybe different here or slightly different than the more pure kind of reflection, which is a completely, backward-looking sort of thing, is that what you learn as a writer in terms of the application of skill often doesn't bear fruit, to mix metaphors, until a year, if not more, down the road. So part of your reflection here could be forward-looking, like I learned about this, and even if you feel you haven't quite like applied it in the way that you want to, at some point you foresee yourself focusing on this and it having these results down the road. So our reflection doesn't need to be completely backward-looking. It could be, just taking this vantage point now of where have we been, but also where are you going as a writer, a person who practices this craft or this skill. So in addition to those kinds of things, maybe the most important thing to focus on here is really to keep it specific. So specific things that you learned, whether it's from the course, from your peers, the other writing that you've done, the exercises we've done, the textbook, you can range widely, but keep it specific. The examples then will almost always be the actual writing that you've done. So I don't want to hear about how you really want to make your poetry flow better because flowing better is good. That is just way too general. It's a nice place to start, but what does that actually mean? Does that involve the use of rhyme, of rhythm, of particular form? Why is a poem that flows better always better if it is? And then what are some examples of where you've read that in others' work, read it in the textbook, and then applied it in your own actual writing? So you're almost quoting yourself. Think of that as the core of every paragraph you write is self-quotation. And it doesn't have to be just stuff you wrote for the workshops. It could be stuff that you wrote in any facet of the course that we've covered. And the thing that I mentioned that I'll mention again, because I think it's just a really nice thing to do as a student, but also to read, because we're doing this in this discussion board format where you're reading and replying to others again, is if you feel like you learned something by reading other people's work, really, really take the time to say that, right? It's important for you, but you can imagine if someone said that I read your work and in your short story you did a great job of concluding it without it feeling false or phony or a little too perfect, whatever the case might be. But if you saw that in someone else's work, say so, because it feels really good if you're the author of that work and you feel like, wow, someone really took my work seriously and treated me as an author who practices this craft that somebody else can learn from. So don't be afraid to use as one of your kind of contextual learning areas the writing that other people have done for the class. And again, keep it specific. Quote from your own work, quote from their work, quote from the course material, textbook, specific stuff within the class that we've done. Okay, so it's a fairly straightforward question, I know, what did you learn in this class? But actually there's a lot of ways that you can approach this, and it really has some serious benefit for us at this point in a creative writing class as we wrap things up. The other piece that you'll notice here that's now open is a final survey. It's like a class evaluation sort of a thing. It's very simplistic, to say the least. It's anonymous, it's not graded, so I really want you to do it, but there's no strings attached to it. It's the usual thing like, what did you like about the course? What could use improvement, do you think? And I take them very seriously, which is why it's good, to be perfectly honest, to hear what works, not just what didn't work, or if you felt like the course was pretty good and you just don't want to say anything, I'd actually like to hear from you about what you felt made the course good, so that I can make sure that I do that consistently through a course like this. Maybe it's something that I can move into other courses as well. So, not to prime the pump too much, but I need to hear that good stuff as well. As far as weaknesses, just be realistic is the only thing I'd say. And again, it feels like I'm already being on the defensive. But I've had people take these kinds of class surveys and say, well, I wish we could have met face to face. Well, okay, but it's an online class, so that's not really useful feedback, to be perfectly honest. So just be realistic about, the format or what I can realistically change. But yeah, please do it, because I really like to get that feedback, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between. Okay, so we are getting close to wrapping everything up then. If you have any final questions or concerns or comments, let me know. Be in touch by email. I'll certainly be in touch again before we wrap things up for good, but be sure you're finishing up the final workshop, and then of course take some time with that reflection piece to really get to some, specifics about what you've learned in this class, and I look forward to reading those. Okay, so if you have questions, be in touch, and otherwise I'll talk to everybody soon.